welcome to the Housing and Community Services of Lane County. Welcome commissioners and staff and guests. I don't see any public comments.
No.
No public comments. So do we have any adjustments to the agenda? Commissioner's response. No public comment. Remonstrance? Okay, no emergency business. So we're going to go on to administration then, and we're going to be doing our work session today. So I'm going to just hand it over to Jacob. Sure.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here today, and I just wanted to introduce the staff members that are around the table, and you'll hear from them more as we get into the presentation. But Beth Goudet is our asset manager, and a big part of this presentation is focused on asset management. You all have met Steve Oakes, he's our real estate development director, and then obviously you've met Valerie Warner as well, who's our deputy director. So leading up to the transition between myself and Larry, I had a number of conversations with Shar and Hugh and Faye, and then in particular Faye and Shar were tasked with negotiating the employment contract with me. And in those meetings we talked just generally about some things that the agency was facing, and Faye and Shar both thought it'd be a good idea to have a work session where we could go into a little more depth on some of the kind of opportunities and challenges that AXA faces as an organization. So this is really a byproduct of the conversations I've been having with many of you around this table. So the key point of this meeting today is that we'll be coming back to you over the next 6 months with a number of actions and orders that are necessary to pursue additional funding opportunities, to secure some funds to stabilize our existing portfolio, to talk about a partnership with potentially Cornerstone or the future of our nonprofit, and then we need to develop a strategic plan. So basically there'll be a lot of opportunities for us to be back here, and we wanted to give you an opportunity to get a thorough briefing before we ask you for something specifically. So the agenda for today is for me to just give you a quick organizational overview. You know the organization pretty well, but I wanted to kind of make sure that you had a sense of just where we are as an organization. And like I mentioned, a big part of the presentation today will be focused on our existing real estate portfolio and some of the due diligence that we've been doing since I started 2 years ago. We, as you know, have a robust real estate development pipeline, and we have a conditional approval from HUD for what's called the Rental Assistance Demonstration Program. We've briefed you on that before, but wanted to kind of get that back in front of you. Number 4 is the Future of Housing Plus. That's our nonprofit subsidiary. And then by December 31st of this year, we need to develop a new 5-year strategic plan. So that's what we're going to cover today. So there are a lot of changes that we're managing at AXA. These are all good changes, but as we've discussed in the lead up to me being hired at AXA, there hadn't been a lot of change and there hadn't been a lot of turnover at AXA for a lot of years. And really that change and turnover started a bit before I got there, but it's really kind of continued at a pretty aggressive pace since I've started. And again, that's not necessarily anything that I've done, it's just that a lot of folks are retiring, and just there's a lot of federal and local changes that are just happening and we're managing. So that kind of covers the internal changes. As you know, when people leave the organization, we try to promote from within, so that kind of creates a domino, a ripple effect within the organization. So it's not just one position turning over, oftentimes it's 2 or 3 as people move up. We had not invested as much funds as we needed to in training and education for our staff, so we're really committed to that, and that's been a big emphasis of ours. Succession planning, Larry did an excellent job with succession planning, but that goes beyond the executive director. There are division directors that have a lot of experience, and even other senior management, middle management positions that we really need to have a plan for in case people leave those positions. And then, as I mentioned before, in good spirit, Larry was not a big technology guy, so we've really kind of stepped up and are moving into, just more efficient technology, and that includes going to electronic files and rewriting most of our procedures. So external changes, our real estate assets that we'll get into in a minute are not getting any younger, so we really need a plan for those. And then I mentioned the development pipeline. And then both Valerie and I and Beth and Steve, we are playing an active role in kind of national, state, and local sort of policy making around affordable housing. So just to kind of give you a quick overview, so to the far left, we have Chuck Hawk, who's our Section 8 director, and Chuck, we're developing a succession plan for Chuck, just because we need to have a plan for that. That's our biggest program at roughly $14 million a year. Steve Oakes and Kurt Bondere and Beth are all working together on development and asset management. You all know Mira, who runs our resident services program. Carla's our HR director, and then Valerie is our deputy director. Just so you know, what's under Valerie is IT, our energy services division, which is a partnership with Lane County. We have a new finance manager, Vicki Nutter, who you'll meet later this month when we present our budget. She's really hit the ground running and is making a big impact. And then our housing director is Jenny Costello, and she's also a person that's planning to retire next year, so we need a plan for her retirement. So this is the biggest portion of our presentation, and this is around asset management and preservation. I got to make sure I turn this over to Beth at the right time here. So just so you know how we're organized around development and asset management. So Steve is our development director, and he oversees real estate development, asset management, and capital projects. Obviously under Steve is Beth Cadet, who you'll hear from in a minute, and then our capital project manager, we wanted to be here today, Kurt Bondere, but he just had a baby last week, so you'll meet him at some point in the future. And then we have some project specialists, and then Jim McCoy, our former real estate development director, works part-time, just helping out with financial structure. So really we have an exceptionally strong team here. There's 8 people. We have experience with all the different types of housing, a lot of construction experience, and a lot of risk management experience. So I believe, so this is an overview of our portfolio. So 1,533 units on 31 sites. Valerie has a little cheat sheet card for you all that kind of frames where some of our assets are in the community. So 707 public housing units, and as you see, they're older buildings. We have 519 mixed finance units. The majority of those are built with low-income housing tax credits. We have 157 HUD-assisted units, also called project-based Section 8, and then we have 150 other units with varying funding sources. The one thing that is really important to us is that partnerships are how we do what we do, and we have partnerships with over 30 community organizations that are under the umbrella of this real estate portfolio. So you could probably see this better on your presentation, but what we did here is break up the portfolio for you in sort of the different funding categories, and then we break it up again later in different what we would call risk categories. So just a little bit about the history of asset management at HACSA. So prior to my starting at HACSA, there were probably 4 or 5 people that were involved in what I would call asset management. Housing authorities and nonprofit housing owners across the nation almost all have a dedicated asset manager, and then that person's supported by others within the organization. But to really get a handle on your portfolio, you need one person that's tasked with that responsibility, and that is Beth Cadet. So in early 2014, we hired Beth. And then in 2014, later in 2014, we asked Kurt Bonderay to join her to start to reposition the portfolio. So with this, I'll just turn it over to Becky.
Good morning. So I want to talk to you about the financial overview of our asset properties, and this particular slide is representing the non-public housing units. These properties, and these are kind of annual averages, the net operating income, and that would be the income that the property throws off before any financial expenses, before any debt service, before any reserves that we put away for capital repairs. They average about $95,000 a year. Many of these properties have permanent loans. The average loan balance on these is a little over $400,000. And by the time you take out any of the financial expenses, what you've got left is just over $14,000 for an actual net cash on the properties. We went and we contracted for some assessments of the properties. We self-performed assessments of the properties. We have most of them done now. And we have a capital need repair balance over the next 1 to 5 years that was shown in all of those reports that came back of about $2 million per site if you were to average them out. Some more, some less. And the actual money that we have put aside, the actual balance in each one of the accounts to take care of those repairs, averages at this time about $118,000. So what you see here is the need outweighs what we've been able to put aside, and we're restricted by how much we can put aside.
Just to interject briefly before Beth hits the next slide. The other thing I'd say is that this is not an issue that's specific to Lane County. This is really a nationwide issue where affordable housing was started to be built aggressively in the early 90s. The buildings are older, we've underfunded replacement reserves, or the buildings couldn't afford appropriate reserves. So the context for me is that this is a national challenge.
Quick question, maybe not so quick, it's intended to be quick. Those numbers, 95, 118, 2 million, those are by project, not by unit.
They are by projects.
So you have, just looking at this quick summary, you've got 964 units in Eugene. How many projects is that?
This represents 18 projects.
So you can multiply all those numbers by 18 to get a total number?
Per project, yes. Or you can take the number of units and get it per unit. You can break it down in lots of different ways.
Yeah. Okay, but you're breaking it down by project.
I am. Each one of these projects, unlike the public housing, has its own operating funds. You can't mix them all in between for the most part. So this seemed to be the best way to represent on an individual basis.
Okay, and do you have a plan, or is that looking ahead to other slides of how to deal with that apparent difference?
Yes.
I'm glad you answered that.
So this is the same slide.
Just to reinforce that, as I take the capital repair reserve and subtract it from the estimated need over the next 1 to 5 years, we're looking at just under $34 million that's going to be needed over the next 1 to 5 years for.
And this is for the asset properties, not the public housing. So those needs vary from, that's a broad balance, and there's a couple of properties that need a big chunk of that are currently average up. So, and we'll talk more about that. This is the financial condition, the same spreadsheet you saw earlier that was color-coded by what type of funding is associated. This is how we have broken it down and assessed the risk of these properties. At the bottom you see green, we show those as strong. These are properties that are stable. They have stable rents, they have a stable cash flow. We have enough reserves to take care of the expected needs over 5 years. We've been able to put enough. That's where we put those. In the blue, we have, what do we call that? We're calling that moderate. So moderate shows that where maybe 1 or 2 of their criteria are in good shape, there's a third one or a fourth one that's throwing it off. It's at risk for various various reasons. Either it's got declining cash flow, or the reserves aren't quite enough, or in some of these cases, the properties have, on their permanent loans, they have a tax credit interest rate reduction that is getting ready to expire shortly, so we need to look at doing some restructuring there. In the orange, we have properties that we're showing as declining or challenged. These are for a lot of those criteria I talked about, either it's loans or it's condition or it's cash flow. They're all being challenged in that way, and that's where the majority of these fall.
Excuse me, just interested, now this chart, when we're looking at it, has public housing in it as well.
It does.
Right.
Yep, that one does.
It does. And, you know, I'd just add, and Beth touched on this, this is really a combination of both physical challenges and financial
Yes.
challenges. The public housing portfolio is particularly challenged because it's not as easy to, well, it's nearly impossible to refinance or to bring tax credits into public housing. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation.
So early last year, we sought out a grant to help us understand where we're at with the financial and the physical condition of these properties. The grant, we were awarded funds to seek out a financial consultant to get ideas on how we can deal with the capital needs. Of course, before that, we had to understand exactly what the capital needs were. So we obtained envelope assessments and capital needs assessments, and an envelope is the outside of the building, the siding, the roofing, overhang, the water integrity of the building. And we obtained 5 of those. 4 of them came back with substantial repairs needed, the least of which was about $750,000, the most was about $3.8 million. So that kind of rearranged our direction a little bit. I don't think we were quite expecting that much of a need. So we're now talking to financial consultants, and not just one, several of them. We've talked to HUD, and we've talked to different investors. We're seeking out different ways to go about taking care of these repairs. The other thing that we've done is with our team at HAGSA, we've gone out and done capital needs assessments of the majority of the other properties that we have, so that we have actually a 20-year idea of where these properties, what they're going to need when, based on the current condition and the expected life expectancy of the different components of the property. How old a roof is when we think we're going to need one again. So Kurt and I mostly have been going about taking on the immediate needs of the properties. We've been doing a lot of, and this is over last summer and this summer, planning in the spring. We're getting roof repairs, siding repairs, stairs, major expensive components to the building. We're working in conjunction with Taxes Energy Services Division to get electrical and heating system upgrades in a lot of the properties, and then asphalt parking lots, preventative maintenance type of things. So as far as the public housing, there's a different model that's used to assess the needs of public housing. And this is a HUD-developed program, and it's called a Green Physical Needs Assessment. It's a very large, complex program that assesses the needs in the same ways that we went out and did it for our other properties. So HAGSA receives about $1 million a year in capital funds. That money is specifically to be used for public housing units to do capital repairs on those properties. And the report that we had done indicated that there's about $6.4 million worth of capital projects or repairs that are needed immediately on our public housing sites. And when it scans it out for the next 1 to 5 years, it's $8.3 million. So our public housing needs a lot of capital repairs at this point. They identified a lot of things. So traditionally, the method for repositioning public housing in developments was HUD's demo dispo program. It allowed you to demolish or dispose of a unit or a property when it was no longer feasible. The RAD program was introduced about 3 or 4 years ago, and that is the program now that is put into place so that you don't just dispose of the unit or you don't just demolish it, but you actually are able to take that subsidy that comes out of the property that you will be getting rid of and putting it into new affordable housing units. So that's the program that's in place now, and we're going to talk about it a little bit more later. So, proactive things that we're doing. Number one, we're doing the assessments that we talked about. We're seeking out consultants, like we talked about. We've gone out and we performed an RFP. We put an RFP for new third-party property management companies for all of our properties that we don't self-manage. And we've hired 2 new firms. They take over October 1st on some of the sites and November 1st on some of the other sites. All of that's in the process right now. And we are, part of the contracts that we're taking out with them is that we are going to require that they put out a preventative maintenance plan, carry it through, report on it monthly, and also that they will provide just an asset management plan to look at long-term at these assets on an individual basis. We're also doing a lot of training, property managers, maintenance staffs, at all levels.
So just to give you kind of the results of 2 of the envelope condition assessments, and Beth talked about, we hired professional consultants to do some of the envelope assessments and capital needs assessments, and then we self-perform some. These are both ones that we hired a private consultant to perform. And they did what was called destructive testing, obviously, where they pulled some siding and other building systems apart and obviously documented what we have here. The biggest challenge that we face, frankly, is Sheldon Village. It was built in 2002 and 2003, and we're looking at least $3.6 million to fix the envelope of this building. And I'll talk a little bit about our different strategies. So then Richardson Bridge is it is our earliest tax credit property. It was built in 1992. If you look down in the lower left-hand corner, and you guys have seen this type of construction where there's no eaves, and we live in the Pacific Northwest. So we've come a long ways in terms of building science, but this is certainly a building that needs to get fixed. The other thing that we'll be facing when we fix these buildings is the repair estimate is $750,000, so that would be keeping the existing design. But if we really want to fix a building like this, we would add eaves and do some other design work to really prevent water from penetrating the envelope over time, and that will cost more. So there are a number of strategies that we'll use to reposition the portfolio. We can seek new tax credits, so that's a viable option. Those, as you all know, are very competitive, but we have a proven track record of securing funding. There's other OHCS funding, like trust fund, and the last legislature approved a little over $60 million for affordable housing. We're not sure if that funding could be used or not, but we're exploring that. We can refinance existing loans and actually increase our loans to free up the capital we need. We have some properties that don't have loans, so obviously we can get loans. There is the possibility of litigation within the statute of limitations, and there's also the possibility of insurance claims. We've met with kind of a litigation and insurance attorney experts from Ball Janik out of Portland, and they're doing a lot of this work, and they're currently assessing whether those are viable options for us to look into. So what we wanted to do is break the presentation up a little bit, and just before we move on, just see if you had sort of any questions.
I have a lot of questions, but I suspect, do you anticipate being able to find the funding to make these corrections without having to sell properties?
We're going to talk about the rental assistance demonstration program in a minute, and there is a connection between the rental assistance demonstration and repositioning our portfolio.
Oh, wait, I think my question concluded.
Yeah.
I'm interested in whether now or later today or in the future, you've got an interest in developing affordable home ownership, multifamily home ownership, as part of your plans in the future, namely that we have different levels of habitation, from abject homelessness with little or no prospect of remedying that, all the way up to more homes than a human being really needs. And we have this wide array of home ownership or non-home patterns. And I'm curious whether you've given any thought to, and whether this board's given any thought to, a role of providing another rung on a ladder toward getting people into home ownership by building more and more multifamily structures, and with the idea of eventually turning them over to the residents.
Yeah, I'd like to talk a little bit more about that model. It's obviously not something that we've done, but as we look to the future and develop our new strategic plan, we should talk, and so I can better understand what you're doing.
Mr. Frank? Well, I'd like to tag along with that a little bit, Commissioner Simpson. That's a fantastic concept. It's something that the Public Homelessness Board is looking at on a lot of different levels. Is having one of the steps in the housing ladder, what's traditionally being called the housing ladder, being equity building. You know, for people who have never had equity in much of anything before, or it's been a while since they had an opportunity to gain equity. I don't know if it's a part of the future for Axe's model, but it's something that's being considered, whether it be in tiny houses or property or shared housing opportunities with equity building. It really is an interesting concept for the future.
Thanks. Before I forget, I'm just going to hit on something that was in your introduction. You mentioned you're going to a lot of electronic records and changing procedures. I hope that you're taking into account protection of client information as you computerize that. And there is some, maybe work with, we have a new person in our IT office that's specifically about security. You could possibly work with our IT folks on that. But that's a big issue out there nowadays, is protecting your client's information. And as we're talking about asset management, which is really risk management, that's a huge risk management issue. So I just want to say, welcome back, and I haven't had a chance to meet you. This is near and dear to my heart as an engineer. That's basically what I did at EWEB, was asset management for the water system. It's always hard when you first start these assessments. We went through two 18-17% rate increases back to back after we had had a full assessment of EWEB's asset management issues in our water system. So, you suddenly realize that we haven't, over the years, it's in general with almost any public agency that's managing assets, we've had a tendency to want to keep the costs down to the public. And therefore, we've never really looked at this long-term issue of renewal and replacement of what we've already purchased. We always look at the new thing that we can whip out the golden shovels and turn a patch of dirt over with in our hard hats for the television cameras, but it's not so great to come back and say, well, we've got to come back and repair window frames, strip siding, repair window frames, and recaulk and seal windows is not quite as sexy for folks. So I appreciate you guys doing this. That is a scary couple of numbers, because as I did quick calculations between the non-public and the public, we're looking at approximately just under $44 million over the next 5 years deficit. that's not, not taking out $5 million a year you're getting on the public housing side and $118,000 per project you have on the non-public. That's what we need in addition. $44 million for the next 5 years. That's a pretty scary number, and how we're going to manage to do that.
And that's the biggest problem, right? Because HUD's just not wanting to put a lot of money into the public housing anymore. Or am I wrong?
You're absolutely correct in the context of public housing and the way that some of the affordable housing developments of the non-public housing were structured in the 90s and even into the early 2000s didn't afford enough replacement reserves to anticipate some of these capital needs. I would also say when you look at pictures like these, this is more than just the budgets being too skinny. This is a lot of construction in some cases. Great. Well, again, we can kind of come back to these issues, but why don't we move into the next section of the presentation. And I've asked Steve to kind of give you an overview of each one of our developments that are in our pipeline currently.
Good morning. Yes, I'll go ahead and start off with one that you're all very familiar with, and that's Baskin Village Phase 2. So financing closed on that at the beginning of August, and so construction is underway. They're out there clearing the site. It's going great. We're actually going to have a groundbreaking here in a couple weeks, which you'll receive an invite to. We're working out the details here. So, and so that was when we're partnering with St. Vincent de Paul. They're going to be online in October here with Baskin Phase 1, so they'll be renting it up, and as you probably heard, there was an overnight line waiting for to get into that. So it's definitely
Beautiful project.
it is, yeah. It's and just the perspective you get when you walk down that street. They just did a great job in fitting in the neighborhood. It's going to be great. And
Against all odds, right?
right. And then, so one of the components of that is the 5 vet lift units that are going to be part of Baskin Phase 2. Originally, they were going to be part of Phase 1, but it worked out better that they ended up in Phase 2. And so St. Vincent de Paul actually has we have an agreement with them. They'll have the case managers there for those folks and be working. And it's great with the proximity to the Veterans Clinic down the road there on the Chad House. So it'll work out great. So then we'll be... if it stays on schedule, it'll be done about a year from October. So, and then you've also heard a lot about this one. So this is the Oaks at 14. This is our partnership with sponsors. And we just recently brought on, we selected Burks and Delaney a bit ago through an RFP process to we had a development team. And just recently selected Essex Construction to work with them on the Oaks, and we'll be coming to you at the end of September with their approval for their contracts and all the forming of the LLC and things that we'll need to do to move forward on this. One of the big things that we're working on for this project is the Citizens Advisory Committee, and so that's we're forming that to kind of facilitate public discussion around the project. It's very much an infill project. It's going to be very, very close to the neighbors and with the population we're serving there. We're going to bring together a group so that neighbors and concerned folks can come and raise questions, and then folks on the advisory committee can then provide information and advise us how to handle issues. And we expect that we're hoping to have Lake County probation, a representative from the Eugene Police, elected officials, and then also several neighbors that are going to be directly impacted by it on this committee. So, and at this point, we're looking at starting it up early October to get things going. So, and otherwise, it'll be starting construction in March or April of this next year, and it'll be done. It's about a 12, 13-month project, so it'll be done about a year after that. So, I guess one thing I would add in talking about kind of the construction thing, one of the things that construction, just to kind of give you a little peace of mind about how construction practices are now, one of the key parts that we have are now we have envelope consultants that are involved, and so from the it's a third party that will actually pay to look at the building permits before they go in, and they're typically an architect that does this. And then they'll also be involved in both Bascom and Oak Patch. They come out during the construction process and basically look around and check on construction to ensure that we don't have issues like shoulder roof. So, okay, and then Glenwood. So the Glenwood project is about 100 to 150 affordable units, and there's a lot of energy behind this one from the city of Springfield, and there's a lot of work going on with Franklin Boulevard being improved and infrastructure out there. So we've been working closely with the city of Springfield staff regarding when and where the infrastructure is coming in, if there's going to be a parking garage, kind of all those things will influence our development. And then we're still working through the environmental review process with both the City of Springfield and City of Eugene. Once we get through that process, then we'll be able to submit a waiver to HUD to clear up some regulatory issues that we have on the property. And we're actually setting a meeting with the City of Springfield, kind of an informal development, or a formal development meeting for October also. So we're excited about that project. And then on to 6th and Oak. So you're all very familiar with this one also. We've come to you with the contracts for Burks & Delaney and Chambers, which will be building this one. We're working closely with the OB development team on this one, and they've been exceptionally helpful in helping us on the commercial aspect of this project. The commercial part is really not typical for what we do in the tax credit business, and it adds a complexity that we usually don't see. So they've been very helpful in kind of helping us along with that. Right now, the architects drawing up different designs for the ground floor, so we have some options of maximizing commercial or minimizing, and we're kind of working through that with our architect and construction folks, and then also working with the kind of OB folks to look at that to see how that will work with their development. So that one we're hoping to go for funding in 2017 and get it completed by 2018. And then the Turtle Creek home ownership. So this Turtle Creek is a subdivision that was that we'd hoped to develop as affordable single-family homes for folks. After numerous attempts to build homes that were affordable, we just weren't able to do it. The construction costs were too high, and the costs that had already gone in development were too high. And so, because the land was purchased with CDBG funds years ago, basically time ran out on it, and we we're actually having to sell the property now, and it will go up for market rate ownership. The good thing about this is that we'll be able to recoup all the development costs that Taxes put into it, which is over $200,000 over the years, and so we'll be able to recoup that. And the city is actually very interested in still doing something, while it may not fall in the actual affordable range, of doing something very similar to what we planned, so it'll be a nice development, and so we're working with them through that. And then the last development project we have is and my favorite still is the Hope Loop one. And so that's where U of O students are designing a house every year. So fall term they design it, and then the rest of the year they build it. And then at the end of the time they sell it off for affordable housing. And so it's a kind of definitely a win-win situation. The house you see there on the right is the most recent one. The first one's already sold. It's been occupied for about a year by someone that met the income requirements to buy it. And the second one was on a tour of homes, and yeah, it's just great. There's a lot of donated materials. It's just a great project, kind of win-win all around. So.
Just a shout out on Hope Loop. It's in Bethel, of course, and I drive past Hope Loop and by it. Some of the first houses in there were formerly located where Jerry's Home Improvement Center is right now. One of my first involvements with housing in Lane County was moving those houses from the site that now occupies the lumberyard to Hope Loop, including the brick front house out there. If you've ever traveled Hope Loop, you see it's not a brick, it's a Frankston front house. That is where the existing New Jerry store was designed inside that house. When it was located about where, about where the paint department is now. So it's a great public-private partnership that's happened to get Hope Loop off the ground, and it continues to get its name.
Yeah, over 10 years.
Steve, I wanted to just ask a question on the Turtle Creek home ownership. Is it possible to get some information from you that shows why it's not feasible? What the costs are to develop and everything? It's not part of this board, but the Board of Commissioners are working with the City of Eugene right now with their urban growth boundary expansion, and I'd just like to understand, we have property here that was bought and paid for, and we can't afford to build affordable housing on it, so I just kind of want to understand what the issues are with it.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, I can.
Thank you.
And I kind of have a similar question. I mean, we're doing the Oregon Builds. Why couldn't we do that same type of programming at Turtle Creek? I don't know.
Yes, and so we actually approached them about that. They had their hands full with doing one a year right now, so they weren't able to. They could have in the future, but because the CDBG funds were involved, we just couldn't hang on to the property and go that route. We'd also, talked about Habitat for Humanity building on those lots. It was kind of the same thing. It was just a matter of we're at a point where it's flagged by HUD and have to move on it. So, an interesting part about that subdivision was that when initially the whole property was purchased, which includes now the Turtle Creek apartments and the Walnut Park apartments, and the original agreement with the city was that we'd actually subdivide off the rest of the lots and sell them for market rate, and so that was the agreement we had with the city. And then we came back to the city later on and asked if we could give affordable housing a shot there, and it just hasn't penciled out. But I can send you the numbers behind the result of that. So.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
So now we're going to jump in. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So, first I just want to make a quick comment that, envelope issues are not unique to you guys. We've had a few of our own, whether it's the barrel roof on the Serbu Center over the courtroom, or it's over at the Sherman Center and the roof over there. We've had our own sets of major capital repairs due to envelope issues, so don't feel embarrassed about that. So on the 6 and Oak project, how's it going with getting the tax credits and the financing dealing with the lease versus ownership of the land?
So we haven't we haven't decided on an investor yet. That's going to be one of the first when we do decide on investor. That'll be one of the first questions we ask them, though, because that I think is a concern from if we're going to condo out the commercial part of it or not. So that will be a definite question we bring to the investor at that time. But, because what would happen is it could be that the commercial portion could be condoed because we can't use tax credit funding to build in the commercial portion. So it kind of depends on the underwriting requirements for that. And so, but it's definitely on our radar as far as.
I would say, too, just having worked on a lot of real estate finance related to affordable housing, it's not that it can't be done, a lease structure. It just is much simpler to have a fee, simple purchase. So we didn't want to approach the board we didn't want to approach the Lane County board until we have a little bit better of a vision for what kind of project we're going to build there. But we did want to bring that issue back at some point.
Thank you. Just wanted to mention a couple of things. One, Steve, thanks for the presentation. And, we are the board that governs the housing authority. And it's the first time we've had an opportunity in my time on the commission to have a meeting of this type and hearing all this information instead of feeling like we have to rush it through to get to a vote. The leisure of being able to listen to you and talk back and forth is really beneficial. I'm excited about it. But I just wanted to call something out once again. I'll use that term. You mentioned HUD, and that's the question that Commissioner Stewart asked regarding the lack of feasibility on Turtle Creek, the home ownership program. And he said that it was some of the timeline was based upon HUD's timeline that they had kind of precipitated on you. That's maybe not exactly what I would. But HUD tends to sometimes have rigid guidelines that we all have to live by that sometimes either make it more expensive to build property. And the guidelines are all well intended. There's no question about that. They sometimes make it more expensive to build property, or sometimes make it even impossible to build property. And I think a partnership with HUD is maybe forming a little bit on a different front right now. And we have Friday afternoon conference calls. And it really is it's surrounding veterans housing. But HUD is listening very closely to how they can facilitate building, as opposed to sometimes throwing up conditions that make it more difficult to build. I'm not going to talk too much about that right now, but HUD is an opportunity for the future in getting perhaps a little bit more smooth of a working relationship. Once again, their guidelines are all certainly well intended, and we all love HUD and we believe in what they're doing. But sometimes, if it's makes it more difficult for people to get into a house, then they need to hear about it. And Margaret Salazar is actively listening to it right now.
And I would just echo that. We actually went to a HUD workshop just recently, and we were very encouraged with how they were there to listen and provide information, and we were very encouraged as far as their interest in helping us instead of being a hindrance or anything like that. So we were very.
They came down to our April 1st summit. Jacob was at that, and I believe you actually came to that too, didn't you, Steve? The one that was held over at in the Jacobs Gallery. Maybe you didn't, and I apologize. But they were down and they listened intently, took extensive notes, and then brought back results of what they took notes on, things that they're going to do to move forward, helping once again facilitate as opposed to create more onerous paperwork and just timelines and deadlines like the one that you just mentioned. So I'm optimistic, very optimistic for the future.
All right, so we're going to shift gears. This is still kind of in the context of real estate development, but wanted to kind of go back through this rental assistance demonstration program. So I started at AXA in August of 2013, and probably a year prior to that, Dorothy had been working on this rental assistance demonstration. So Beth and I, when I started, immediately started working on a RAD application, and we submitted that in November of 2013. At that time, Congress had a cap on the number of units nationwide that they would approve for RAD, and we weren't within that sort of first allocation. So then late in 2014, Congress approved an increase to the number of units, and that made our application eligible for conditional approval. We heard officially from HUD in March of 2015, and they issued us their conditional approval, basically. And then the first step that they said was that we would be assigned a transaction manager within 30 days, and so we would begin to understand that program a little bit more in depth. Because the program's new, it's a pilot, and it's very much kind of moving and changing real time at the national level. So we got our conditional approval in March of 2015, and then we didn't hear from our transaction manager until June of 2015. So really over the last 60 days, we're better understanding what the program requirements are and sort of how those program requirements are going to play out here in Lake County. I think, just so you know, because of just the uncertainty at the national level, we weren't able to engage as much as I would have liked with the cities, because I really couldn't give them clear answers to some of the questions they would have. So we presented at the April 1st meeting that Pat referenced, so HUD was there. and the cities were there. And Margaret Salazar, actually, who Pat referenced, is a terrific leader in the Portland HUD office, and she actually used to manage the Rental Assistance Demonstration Program at HUD in DC. So she's a real asset and ally to us as we move forward. But what we propose to do is that HACSA has 112 single-family homes and duplexes. There are 90 in Eugene, and there are 20, a little over 22, I think, in Springfield. And what we proposed to do was sell off all of these units, and then we would take those proceeds and we would use them to fix up our existing portfolio, and we would also use that to build new units. One of the requirements is that you have to bring those subsidies back in your community. You can't just have those deep rental subsidies go away. And our plan has always been to, again, reinvest the proceeds from the sales into our existing portfolio and then to bring back those 112 units. The other thing I would say is that there are residents living in these units. They have been informed of our intentions, and they get a full relocation package that would include us assisting them to moving into Section 8 or moving into the remainder of our public housing portfolio. So this is just a general timeline, obviously very high level, but we are in the pre-development phase, and we would be complete with the project by 2018. So what's happened so far is that we've gotten that conditional approval. That's that first bullet under completed milestone. It's called the CHAP. And we've looked at different potential sites and neighborhood standards for some different sort of development options, which I'll go back over in a minute. And then there's a formality called the PIC removal request that we've completed. So what has to happen now, and the deadline is looming, is that we have to select a site for redevelopment of the units. One thing I didn't mention that wasn't mentioned in the slide is that we intend to tackle this probably in two phases. There is a possibility that we could do a single phase, but the idea would be to sell 56 units, bring back 56 units, and then do that same thing in a second phase. So we need to start talking to our residents and preparing a relocation plan. We have due diligence and other sort of preparation that we need to deliver to HUD. And then in 2016, we need to deliver a financing plan to HUD. So as I mentioned, there's sort of two options here. The first would be to do two separate 56 to 60 unit properties using the 9% low-income housing tax credit. And we would kind of do that in sort of two-year phases, two-year phases for a total project duration of 4 years. The problem with the 9%, as we've discussed, is that it's highly competitive. So getting two back-to-back awards, in addition to the two back-to-back awards that we've received for the last 2 years, is it's not impossible, but I want to be realistic about how competitive it is. The option two would be to do a larger development and use a 4% low-income housing tax credit. And this would require a significant amount of gap funding, way more than you would see in a 9%. So obviously the sources are the traditional home funds. We can actually do gap funding ourselves with the proceeds from the scattered site sales. There's also the $62 million that I mentioned the legislature has approved. We're not sure if that could be a possible funding source. And then there's Federal Home Loan Bank, and there's a couple other funding sources that we would seek so that the HACSA proceeds is minimized, so we can use the HACSA proceeds in our existing portfolio. That's kind of the goal. So now we're going to go back through the development sites that Steve has talked about with this kind of rental assistance demonstration lens and kind of give you our sense of whether these parcels are viable for a RAD project or not. So we are very bullish about Glenwood and our project in Glenwood, that we're calling Glenwood Place. However, there are, again, significant infrastructure uncertainties. There's a major project that's going on along Franklin, and the city of Springfield is still working on the infrastructure that would be north of Franklin, including a question about where parking will happen. And then the other thing is, because the RAD project will require that we bring back similar sized units, as a staff, we're discussing whether or not Glenwood is a good site for families. I think Glenwood will be a terrific site for families in the future, but in the near term I have questions about it. So another development that could be a RAD site is 6th and Oak. And this, we're not going to be ready for a 9% at 6th and Oak, we don't think, this next year. And Glenwood, given the infrastructure uncertainties, is also a question mark for 2016. 6th and Oak could be a site for a 4% transaction. And one of the things that we're talking about as a staff is, what would it be like to have larger bedroom sizes in downtown Eugene? A lot of communities have invested in larger bedroom sizes to energize a kind of a city core, and that's worked really well in communities. So it's kind of exciting, and at the same time, I think we still have more due diligence to do, more conversation to have about family housing in downtown.
We got a brand new grocery store being built just down the street, so I think the issue about groceries is not really an issue for this site. Maybe
No, we're downtown.
Yeah, maybe schools aren't that close. You're not going to walk to school and a kid to elementary school from there. But grocery is not that far away, walking distance.
And we brainstormed even possibilities for our commercial space and, a pharmacy, like a Walgreens. I mean, we haven't talked to anybody like that, but, that could be a possible anchor, which would really, again, lend itself to workforce housing.
Yeah, I think 6th and Oak, a lot of options exist within walking distance. Glenwood is way more public.
So HACSA has another site on 48th and Main. It's 8.5 acres. It's got good proximity to schools, grocery, and transit. So we don't. Our gut is that the infrastructure is going to be feasible. It's a flat site. It's a large site. The issue here is that the work we've done with the city of Springfield has been really focused on Glenwood, and so if we're wanting to pursue another site in Springfield more quickly than we would in Glenwood, we certainly have some work to do with the city of Springfield, explaining the RAD program, explaining why the RAD timing requirements are compelling. So we also have a 3.5 acre site on River Road, and it's adjacent to Maury Jacobs Park. We would love to build housing on this site. There's a couple issues. Proximity to a grocery store is really, really important for the folks we serve, and this site is nowhere near a grocery store. It's also in a floodplain, and you can build in a floodplain. It's just more complicated. So I guess the only other thing I'd mention about RAD is that for me, we have to seize this opportunity, and it's also got some really intense and looming deadlines that could require us to reshuffle our development pipeline up to and including pursuing a site that's not kind of on our short list. So that's something that we'll be coming back to the board on with kind of a specific proposal. The other thing I mentioned is that we're working on scheduling a meeting with city leadership from both Eugene and Springfield. We want to brief the two cities together and kind of explain what this program requirements are in more depth. So we wanted to take a quick break and just see if you had any questions about the development pipeline of this rental assistance demonstration program.
I just, the one on the road, I just like my flags still up, putting low-income people in a flood zone, I mean.
It's only a flood zone, you don't count the dams.
That's true, yeah.
And even so, that area, there's a pretty high bank on the river. It's one of these less than a foot flood zones. It's not what you would call, they're going to wipe the whole place out. So. It's been since the 40s since that section of the river has been flooded.
Because of dams? It's just that
Before the dams, yeah.
Before the dams, so okay. Go ahead.
I think I know the answer, but I just want to ask it. Someone who doesn't really know about low-income housing, a casual person looking at this presentation, would be wondering why, in your vision for development, there's no homeless housing. In the sense that we have a lot of homeless people, but there's no emergency shelter, there's no provision for that, and there doesn't seem to be any provision for more public housing for very, very low-income people. Is the reason that just no money from HUD for that?
Yeah, I think that's the short answer, is that there are no deep rental subsidies, no new deep rental subsidies that are being provided to housing authorities or other affordable housing providers. I would say I'm deeply committed to using our resources to serve what I call special populations, so homeless veterans, homeless mentally ill people. And there's a way to do that through priorities and preferences into our existing programs. So as we develop our new strategic plan over the next 3 or 4 months, I want that to be one of the focus groups to really ask ourselves, can HACSA do more in serving these populations? And from my vantage point, the answer is yes.
Is there a legal reason why HACSA doesn't get into emergency shelters? And part B of that is, Portland, which is much a large area, does their HACSA equivalent handle emergency shelter?
So the Housing Authority of Portland, also known as Home Forward, they've renamed themselves. They own and asset manage some shelters, and they don't operate them directly because that's a skill set that Housing Authority doesn't have, and I would characterize HACSA in the same way. We're good at developing new buildings, we're good at asset management, but in terms of actually operating the day-to-day operations of a shelter, that's not our skill, of course.
You asked a really good question about that, about how does this affect the chronically and situationally homeless people that we have in our community. And I think Jacob did a good job of talking about veterans and, in particular, housing first. And housing the people who have traditionally been, A, the most difficult to house, and B, the most expensive to not house. I really am excited about the direction we're moving as far as housing first is concerned. The other part of that is that when we're building new housing, we'll call it permanent housing, it really creates a greater flow-through for the transitional housing opportunities that we're partnering. For instance, the Nightingale Rest Stop is a transitional housing. Hopefully we'll have permanent housing for folks to move into. We don't have as much, and HACSA is in the process of putting more stock on the market to allow people to move through. We moved 17 people through the Nightingale camp so far. More people would like to if they had a place to go. So that's a part of how HACSA really comprehensively addresses homelessness. And significantly looking at more if we are to add more transitional housing, not using HACSA's mechanisms but other mechanisms, and then allowing HACSA to create more stock. It's always been an issue since we first put back in 1996 we put a 1% utility fee for $1 million a year for low-income housing. It failed miserably at the ballot. And since then we've been kind of struggling to build housing stock that's affordable and that that can be managed by HATSA or by St. Louis or by whomever. But this is the way that we're doing it, is putting more stock on the market, working at different models, the types of housing on the market, some through HATSA, some through private sources. And I've mentioned tiny house, and I'll mention it over and over again. That is a way of the future for both equity building and for moving people through transitional housing.
It seems like at the national level, there's been an effort to reduce or defund, or different types of words here, but basically not give HUD as much federal funding as, say, people like me think the Congress should. And that's not meant to be criticism of our senators or most of our representatives from Oregon, but in general it's a critique of the current Congress that they don't really care as much about HUD, and particularly the people that HUD serves. And so there's been a theme of either HUD wastes a lot of money, or the states and the local communities, if they think this is important, ought to pick this up. And so just taking the latter, not the HUD waste money part, but the states and local communities ought to pick this up. I know that other HUD-related agencies, housing agencies in Oregon, besides ours, and maybe it's just Portland, but I don't know which ones actually have done that. They've actually said, hey, the responsibility to deal with these mentally ill people who are homeless, or these veterans who are homeless, or these other special populations who are homeless, that responsibility is being neglected, if not ignored by the federal government. And we could say, oh, politically, gee, that's wrong, they should reverse that. On the other hand, we could say they should reverse that, it is a national disgrace, but what can we do locally? So I'm curious whether you've given any thought, or the executive poobah team that we see in front of us here, whether you guys have given any thought to, well, what kind of mechanism, Commissioner Farr just mentioned there was a proposed mechanism in the city of Eugene, but what's the mechanism that we would use to do this? Or I guess the alternative is we can just take these HUD cuts and balance our budget with what we have, and that's really what we've been doing. Or we could think bigger and go, well, gee, it costs us so much money in our healthcare system to have these homeless people out there. We would like to get them more stabilized. Well, our job isn't to run the healthcare system, meaning HACS. Our job isn't to run a healthcare system. But if we can provide the housing, we could get some savings over it. Or in our criminal justice system, we know that a disproportionate number of these people are either perpetrators or victims of crime. Again, we'd like to get the perpetrators in some kind of probation, some kind of, rehabilitation, and we'd like to get the victims less victimized. So what can you say about, okay, HUD's decreasing their money, what can we do? What can we do? As opposed to just, balancing the budget each year with what we're getting. It seems like there's a devolution going on in our country, meaning that maybe in the 60s the thought was, well, the federal income tax is really spread throughout the country. Maybe that's a great thing. But maybe there's also the idea that local communities ought to look out for people in their own local communities. So I'm just curious whether you've given any thought to, obviously the simplest thing is just keep doing the best we can, and that's what you're doing. Keep doing the best we can with the resources provided. But there's also another idea, and that is just for a small amount of money, we might be able to stabilize those mentally ill people, those crime perpetrators, those crime victims. We might be able to do something to lower our overall community costs.
Well, just a kind of a quick response, given we have to cover 2 more sections, and then I would love the opportunity to meet with any one of you.
I think we should have another session like this. There's enough of us to ask about it.
But I really feel like our elected officials at the state level were brave in the 2015 session, and they allocated $62 million for affordable housing because they knew that affordable housing really is a fundamental stepping stone for folks as they try to achieve self-sufficiency and stabilize their lives. There are communities in this state like Bend and Medford and Corvallis that are in a housing crisis that we're not in, where they can't even get their Section 8 folks to lease up their vouchers because there's just simply no availability. And when we kind of see the things that are happening in downtown Springfield and in Eugene and Cottage Grove and Crestwell, I think it'll be soon that Lane County will have a similar challenge where there just simply isn't affordable housing for people to live in. So I feel like there's a real opportunity for us to bring as much of that $62 million as possible in our community. And as we go through that process, to have a conversation about what additional funding we can bring to bear. I know I forgot to mention Florence. Sorry, Sean.
Yeah. Florence is in a crisis.
Huge crisis for low-income people in Florence, and we want to see what we can do to address that.
Okay, so we had you and Pat.
Several of us on the Lane County Poverty and Homelessness Board, we've had a lot of presentations of positive things in Lane County, where they take land and they put up things like Opportunity Village, Emerald Village, and various other things. I'm wondering if it's possible for HACSA to make available some of its property for these kinds of projects, where it wouldn't administer homeless projects, but it would make it available for other people to do that. Have you talked to Dan Bryan?
Yeah, actually, kind of with kind of Steve's direction, some folks from facilities in Lane County have met with the Poverty and Homelessness Board's Facilities Committee, which I'm chair of, and Lane County has some potential sites, and certainly HACSA is always willing to discuss potential sites with us. So that work is happening in earnest.
Two things very quickly. Jacob, you talked about affordable housing in Lane County. We had a presentation last night on affordable residential property inside the city limits of Eugene at the board meeting. As market rate housing goes up in price, obviously it's going to suck up the price of subsidized housing as the property becomes more and more expensive. And so it's something that we need to keep people's feet to the fire and making sure that the property is more available for residences in Eugene. But significantly, in response to Commissioner Sorensen, the legislature did step up this last session with House Bill 3420, among other things. 3420 was sponsored by Rep. Hoyle and Rep. Olson, a bipartisan bill that would have directed the Oregon Health Authority to put money into housing for projects. It didn't quite get through, but it got wheels, and so we're excited for the future of actually having money put right into Lane County as pilot projects for housing tourists. It's something that I think we're going to see on the horizon, and we'll begin to realize the types of savings that we all understand can happen if we put people who are the hardest to house into housing where they can receive the services that they need to get through the issues that they're dealing with on a regular basis.
And so I wanted to ask the money that we were just discussing that got voted in Oregon for affordable housing. Is it the kind of, how do I say this? Would it allow for 30% of people's adjusted income for the very, very, very low income?
All right. I think the short answer to that is I don't think so. And it's just a gap funding source that would develop housing that would be similar to the low-income housing tax credit. However, HACSA has the ability to project-based Section 8. We've never done that before, and all the communities across the nation that are pursuing innovative solutions, have a project-based sectioning program in place. So as we go through the strategic plan process over the next few months, I'll be educating the public and this board about why I think putting together that program is a good thing for our community. So that's where we could get the deep rental subsidy that you're discussing.
Okay.
So then, just to conclude on this section and then turn it over to Valerie to talk about Housing Plus, this rental assistance demonstration is it's a big opportunity for us to bring in funds to stabilize our existing portfolio. Like I said, I'll be educating and presenting a similar presentation to senior leadership from the City of Springfield and the City of Eugene. I think elected officials also will need a briefing on what I'm calling the preservation of access housing. And I'll need support from the HACSA board and may need you to come and be part of an education session with me. So just wanted you to know that I'll be asking for support in the coming weeks on that effort. Great, so I get to stop talking and let Valerie talk to talk about our next part of the presentation, which is the future of our nonprofit Housing Plus.
You still have to do it.
There you go.
So I've been sitting here this morning trying to think, is there any way to segue into Housing Plus from all this development and housing condition that we've been talking about? And it occurred to me that that the formation of Housing Plus was the result of a goal in our original strategic plan to develop some funding outside of federal funding, because even, in 2011, it was obvious to everyone that we were depending too heavily on federal funding. So the task under the goal was to develop a nonprofit organization. And Larry Abel, our former executive director, did all of the legal and financial work with the IRS, and indeed now we are blessed with a 501c3 nonprofit, and it's called Housing Plus. So Larry assembled the board, and the bylaws identify the purpose of Housing Plus as to improve the living conditions and quality of life for the low-income Lane County residents. That's very broad. And the original intent was to secure charitable donations and pursue grants that would fund enhanced resident services. So that's what they thought they were going to do. And they probably met through, I think they usually met every other month, and maybe they met more often in the beginning. But when Jacob and I came on the scene in August of 2013, When Jacob and I came on the scene in August and September of 2013, and we attended our first Housing Plus board meeting, the agenda consisted of a very detailed development pipeline report by our previous development director, Betsy Hunter. And then Mira Gaddis, our resident services person, made a presentation, kind of her wish list of what she would love to do in terms of resident services. And there wasn't really any discussion about fundraising at all. So at the next meeting, 2 months later, we kind of approached them with some ideas about how they could begin to formulate a fundraising strategy. And our board members declined and said that they were aware that in Lane County there were quite a few well-established and well-respected and well-known nonprofits who were fundraising for similar issues that we would be, and they didn't want to compete with those organizations. So we, went away and kind of scratched our heads and wondered, what to do about that. We realized, we knew that they were right, that getting a 501c3 to a place where people are used to the name and comfortable sending checks there is a lengthy and potentially expensive proposition. So right around that time, 2 of the Housing Plus board members resigned, and we told the other board members that we wanted to take a step back and think, did we want to repurpose the board? If they didn't want to fundraise, how else could we really use this board? And there were some reasonably good ideas about that. Or did we just want to do something else, maybe get new board members who would want to fundraise? And around this time, I think Jacob began to bring his experience to bear on this, and he knew that it's very common for housing authorities to have relationships with nonprofits, either the type that we have with Housing Plus or some other type of scenario. So where am I? So we already had a wonderful relationship with Cornerstone Community Housing, the former Metro Affordable Housing. I'm not sure how many projects we've done together, but I know we're intending to work together on Glenwood. And just sort of a good personal relationship between the two executive directors and the staffs as colleagues. So Jacob and, I forgot his name. Richard. What's Richard's last name?
Herman.
Richard Herman, who's been here at this board meeting before, started to discuss just possibilities. And we have had two meetings that include members of this board, the housing resident members of this board, and some board meetings from Cornerstone and some executive staff from both agencies to just kind of kick around ideas. Jacob found a wonderful, let's see, are we on the next slide, or are we up to you? Jacob found a wonderful consultant to work with us. Her name is Kathy Jaworski. She's got a lot of experience in community development corporations, CDCs, and she's a terrific facilitator, and she's done some research on different types of legal arrangements between housing authorities and nonprofit organizations. So we're just beginning to tiptoe at the beginning of this path, still sort of have an open mind about Housing Plus, about Cornerstone, about HACSA, how we can all work together to do the best job. And I think that's my comments on it.
Yeah, so I just add that, like Valerie said, it's really common for housing authorities to have nonprofit subsidiaries or nonprofit partners. And part of why this is potentially a partnership is, as Valerie mentioned, like starting a nonprofit from scratch, like developing grant writing capacity, developing a fundraising strategy, takes a lot of time and money. And if there's a way to get those same things through a partnership, it's frankly easier and more cost effective. Also, I'd say that Richard Herman is going to retire at some point in the not too distant future, so his board is thinking about what's the future of Cornerstone. So what we're asking for is, and I'll come back formally and ask for your blessing on this or approval, but what we're asking for is just to continue a due diligence process. The meetings we had were just to figure out if there was any there or any possibility. And I think Bolshar and Hugh and then the executive team at HACSA feel like we need to at least take the next step around due diligence and see whether there's legal partnership potential here. One of the big opportunities right now funding-wise is getting Medicaid funds to help low-income folks sort of better their well-being and health. And Cornerstone is actually really well positioned with Trillium in securing those funds. And we recently submitted a grant, Cornerstone did with us as a partner, where if Trillium awards the funds, it would dramatically expand healthcare services within our housing and better the lives of the folks we serve. So those sorts of grant partnerships make us think that there's some potential here. So again, I'll come back on the 29th or soon thereafter and just ask, again, this is just a due diligence process. We're looking at what would a legal relationship look like and what would that mean financially. So that's the presentation on the future of Housing Plus.
So, it sounds like, it's just a summary, you're ending Housing Plus and you're looking at making a future relationship with Cornerstone.
What we want to recommend is that we keep Housing Plus as an entity. We spent the time and money to establish a 501c3. You can meet all the IRS regulations and basically let that entity idle while we went through a due diligence process with Cornerstone, at the end of which we come back with recommendations for the board.
When you set up Future or Housing Plus, when that was set up, was that under a model that other HUD-funded housing agencies were doing, where they were starting their own, maybe closely related nonprofit to help them, much like the University of Oregon has the University of Oregon Foundation, Lane Community College has the Lane Community College Foundation, something like that? Does that change your relationship with other people if you made a special relationship with Cornerstone? And what about your existing special relationships with St. Vincent de Paul or others that are doing similar things?
I think that's a really valid question. So I think we can test that out in a couple ways. One is part of our strategic plan, which we'll talk about in a minute. We'll do some 20 to 25 stakeholder interviews, and we can certainly add that as a question. But I've been really transparent with some of our partners, like Terry from St. Vinny's, that we are exploring this possibility, and I haven't gotten any negative feedback thus far.
And regarding the Nonprofit Association of Oregon and their consultant, Ms. Jaworski, has she given you the feedback that putting the relationship with Housing Plus kind of on hold and pursuing Cornerstone is a better avenue in terms of gaining additional funding through the vehicle of a nonprofit?
Yeah, I think part of what we would come back with is a more in-depth briefing, but the concept would be that Cornerstone historically has developed affordable housing. In a partnership scenario like this, they wouldn't do that anymore. We would be the entity that would do all the real estate development. They would focus more on the resident services and the fundraising. So we think, frankly, a partnership like this could create less competition for scarce resources than existing.
Has that been the experience of other housing agencies? If they take of all the people that come in and want to partner with the government-funded housing agency, and that there's in fact more resources developed from a given community by partnering with one of them rather than the public entity being able to partner with any one of them that come along that depending on their funding and their ability to raise money, which have nothing to do with the quality of their organization, but the dedication of their donors.
Yep. So what we've done is started to develop a comparison of different housing authority nonprofit partnerships. So we could bring that to the board and we could sort of present that to you. It starts to show you how the different partnerships work.
I will say that in my own experience with this, and it's not related to housing at all, but when Lane Community College was talking about getting a spin-off foundation, there was a model at the time. Well, there's a lot of people that want to raise money for education. You might have in your own community organizations that want to raise money to help with education at all levels. Maybe you should partner with one of them. And we rejected that idea because we wanted to have the focus be on helping Lane Community College. So as it's turned out, our foundation, the foundation there, was pretty successful because the focus was defined. I mean, hello, I'm here from the government, I'm trying to help you is not the best fundraising line. That's one of the challenges.
I agree. And again, we're not pursuing this due diligence process lightly. It's going to be an extremely thorough process, and we would invite, we would want other members of the HACSA board beyond Char here to be at the table. So.
And I just kind of have a question about the Housing Plus, because we do have it. We're, as a board, we appoint the members of the Housing Plus board, but basically kind of what happened is that Larry would come to us, blah, 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 and we would just say yes or no, and maybe we need to have a little more hands-on interviewing, or maybe a board member that goes to the Housing Plus board meetings. I mean, I know we're just going to kind of set it aside a little bit, but I'm just thinking that there might be ways we can improve it so that it does start fundraising.
I think that's good.
Well, as recently as March 31st, we appointed 4 board members, and I'm presuming that the board is still intact and the board members are still there. You know, you mentioned that the previous board had a little bit of trouble considering competing with high-profile nonprofits in the area. And there's some high-profile nonprofits. As a former executive director of one such high-profile nonprofit, I can state categorically that all of the high-profile nonprofits would welcome the inclusion as far as, and not viewed as competition, viewed as more or less partnership for funding. And you know, I'm excited about Housing Plus, quite frankly. And I think it's something that, particularly in partnership with other nonprofits, Cornerstone being one of them. I mean, the future of it is great. What I found at Troop Lane County is there are a lot of folks out there who are aching to help, who don't know they are aching to help. And so they just have to be explained why they're aching to help, to give non-government money to help out with some very beneficial projects that really assisted the Lane County government and other governments in our mission to provide housing. So, you know, I want to offer words of encouragement. You know, you won't find opposition. Tell the old board members and the new board members probably know it. They won't find opposition from Troop Lane County. They won't find opposition from Shelter Care. They'll find partnership, and we'll help you know. We'll show you how to do it even better. So it's exciting. And as far as board members who aren't interested in fundraising, they probably should find a different board. Now, boards do need to have people who aren't interested in fundraising, who are more interested in the mission.
Right.
Because if you lose track of that, then why have the nonprofit? The fundraising is part of the nonprofit boards. I was on the board of Oregon Food Bank, and I was sitting there with some of the CEOs of pretty big corporations from the Portland area. It felt pretty small in their presence when they were talking about the checks that they were bringing into Oregon Food Bank. It's a large part of leveraging your place in the community. And you were talking about the branding, making a recognizable brand. You know, that's all part of it. And as I said, there are people out there aching to help who just haven't figured out that they are aching to help yet.
Can I just do a quick time check? So
Yes.
I believe that Diana scheduled 2 hours. My goal was to be done in an hour and a half, but will it work for folks to spend, it would probably be 8 to 10 more minutes, just quickly highlighting the strategic plan session. Okay, great.
Have a little intro for this item. Let's see. You probably are all really familiar with the HACSA strategic plan. We are really proud of it. We feel like our strategic plan shines above other strategic plans because it's a living document. It's on the desk of every manager and director in the organization. And although we're responding to other things all day long, in the course of our work week, we're moving forward our strategic initiatives because we know it's important and because we know we've got a semi-annual reporting deadline to the board. So it's a really good plan in that respect. The most recent semi-annual update was delivered around June 30th, and I think that was maybe the next to last one for that plan. The plan will conclude at the end of this calendar year. And we're all excited about working on the new strategic plan. The entire executive team, I believe, are either new people to the organization or in new positions at the organization. And I know for myself, I've been keeping notes on my desk about things I want to bring up when I get the opportunity in the strategic plan. So, how to do it, there's a lot of different ways to do it, and we've been thinking about how to do it, and we think that we've come up with a terrific plan to do the plan, and Jacob's going to explain it.
So before I talk about process, I just wanted to make sure that you all knew kind of what my vision is, and it's really an opportunity if you want to add to, we can do that over the coming month or so before we sort of jump into the process. But for me, the number one reason why we have jobs is because there's poor people in our community that need to be served. And we serve those folks through our employees. So for me, our employees have to be a top priority. The other thing I forgot to talk about earlier, but under this first bullet, you'll see a modern, innovative workplace. And if you've been to our site on Day Island, you would know that there's some envelope and issues. That building is going to need to be replaced, basically. So one of the things we'll have to do in the next 3 to 5 years is find a new administrative headquarters. And we would try to combine our two offices so that all employees can work out of one location. So then, preserving our existing housing assets and subsidies is a huge priority for us as an organization. Developing new affordable housing units, and then the new administrative building has to be a top priority for us. Reviewing the special needs populations we're serving, I mentioned that earlier, and doing more in our community for these special populations. We need to decrease our reliance on federal funding. The Rental Assistance Demonstration Program is a step in that direction, and we need to do more. And then it's really all about partnerships. So we, as I mentioned earlier, have partnerships with over 30 organizations. Lane County is a great partner. The cities are a great partner. So that's going to be a big emphasis of ours. And then in terms of the proposed strategic plan process, so Steve and Valerie both graduated from the U of O, and there's a class that's taught in the planning school focused on strategic plans. So we actually have 3 graduate students that will work under this facilitator, and they'll do all the interviews, and they'll summarize everything that they've heard from both the specific interviews, and then we'll hold some specific focus groups. But we're going to hire a facilitator that will kind of guide those grad students. And in December, we would bring back a proposed strategic plan to you. And again, I think through the interviews and then the focus groups, which you all will be invited to, you'll be an active part of the plan development. So I would say that concludes our presentation.
I'll just say that on the strategic plans, we have a master of it sitting in the room here. We also develop our Lane County. It's really a masterful document. And also in the Health and Human Services Department, they just developed the Community Health Improvement Plan, which is a strategic plan for the Health and Human Services Department. 2 great strategic plans, which are models to build any strategic plan off of. Great.
So this is where I need to come in, right, with the, or should I come in already with the Florence problem before we close? I had talked with Bob Teeter, who does the housing for homeless at the Outreach Center. And because what's happened is there are just no rentals available in Florence right now. I mean, you see 3 or 4. Most all of them are over $1,200 or more, not feasible for minimum wage workers or below that. And people are living in tents, which is going to get a little hard for them when the winter hits. And so what he said is those that do come to the Outreach Center, about 229 people a year. Out of that, they're only able to serve 118 for various reasons. And it's not because they don't have money, because they do have the rapid rehousing from Lane County. It's because there's no place to live. It's like there is not enough affordable housing. And it's just getting worse and worse. So Jacob and I have been, talking about what do we do and how can we help, and I just wanted to bring it out there that hopefully maybe that can be part of the strategic plan, and maybe look, it may not just be Florence. I mean, it could be other outlying rural areas as well. I'm sure it is, like Oak Ridge and Kinsey Bridge, but we, keeping in mind we do not have a homeless shelter in Florence. We have very little for veterans. Basically, we have the outreach center. Thank goodness we have them, where that you can get a couple of nights of a motel room, or which mostly that goes towards domestic violence victims priority. Or you can they'll give you a tent and a sleeping bag, and you get 14 days on campground. In the winter, there's a warming center, but there are no shelters where you can stay the night in, so just wanted to put that out there, and I wanted Jay to know too.
I'm well aware of the issues in Florence. Working with Dave again just to try and make sure he's got funding he needs to do some of those overnight stays in hotels and the various other couponcy issues. But there's a real issue in Florence that's different from the rest of the county, as it's a resort area. So the value of land is driven up because it's a resort area. So you deal with this in almost any resort town that's tourism based. Whether it's in Tahoe, in that area, or it's on the coast. The rentals that are there are vacation rentals, so they're outrageously expensive. And that's where the price of the property is based on. I'm hoping that the tribes will keep moving forward with their Once a Lake project, and the tribes are somewhat aware of this issue of workforce housing, affordable housing down there, because they have difficulty as now the largest employer in Florence. I think they finally outstripped the hospital with the casino, and now they own the golf course and the hotel they have. They're having difficulty keeping workforce in place because the workforce has no place to live. It is a big issue down in Florence, and there is no shelter there. They did get an Egan warming center set up last winter through that program, finally down in that area. It is a big concern. It's a little bit different than the rest of the county. But I'm concerned that in some of our decisions elsewhere, such as Envision Eugene, we could drive the same thing, where if we restrict or drive up the cost of land, it'll drive up the cost of regular residential housing, and the rest of the housing will go up with that. We just have to be aware of that issue. There's definitely an issue in Florence, and in the strategic plan, maybe that's something we can look at. Is that particular area as a place of concentration? Because one of the things we keep telling folks is we're going to have to diversify our economy, and one of the places we talked about is tourism. The issue is, though, a lot of tourism jobs aren't what you would consider, a single earner being able to support some family. It usually takes 2 or 3 earners or something like that, and then be able to afford rent in a resort area that has the tourism. It kind of makes it very complex for getting workforce for that tourism industry.
Well, I just wanted to throw out too that at Laurelwood we have that property, our community gardens there, but it could be easily moved, where there's just the 3-4 bedroom units, and it's a huge piece of property. We already own it. We could maybe look at down the line of putting, like what you were talking about, a owned building, Section 8, if we can't do public housing.
Those infill housing options, especially in towns like Florence, are important.
Just a thought. The other thing that did come up too, just to let y'all know what's going on, the people who are with Section 8 vouchers are literally losing their vouchers because they can't find a place to live, and I was hoping we could kind of talk about giving them more time, because it's sort of not their fault at this point, but just to throw out. And the other thing, the barriers is every time they go to any property management company, they have to pay for a background check. And I was wondering if there might be a way that we could, per adult, basically, so, looking at some money for people who don't have a lot of money, if there was a way we could go through, like, especially Section 8, AXA does that anyway, why we couldn't maybe work with the property management companies to take that background check, maybe put a 6-month limit on it or whatever.
You think?
Yeah, I mean, instead of having to do all this expense and then not get the house, and then you got to turn around and do it all over again, and that's happening in Florence as well.
Two quick things. One is, I love this work session. This really, for me anyway, this really works. It gives us time to kind of get into stuff. And I hope we can have at least one more we get on the strategic plan, because I personally have a lot of questions around certain issues, like where I live used to be senior housing only, and it changed over, and so my question is it possible to actually have a senior-only complex? Does that make sense? That kind of discussion, it would be kind of useful to have those kind of discussions at a work session. And to raise that question, where would I be able to raise that question as we go forward?
Well, what we're envisioning for the strategic plan process is to do some focus groups. So let me think a little bit about whether there's a focus group that could focus on a couple issues, including the one that you just raised. And we can look into the legalities of
Yeah, that's right. It may be a simple answer, you can't do it, and then we don't have to worry about the time, but...
Okay.
I just wanted to say thank you, Jacob. I think some time ago I informed you of an opportunity in Oak Ridge, and I spoke with the mayor there yesterday. He's very happy that you and it sounded like possibly St. Vincent's are kind of teamed up together to maybe look at some opportunities there, because there is another community with a lack of affordable housing opportunities.
Yeah. I think Jim and Louis, the city administrator, are just terrific individuals, and it was an honor to go with them.
Yeah, thank you.
Is there anything else you want to say? Yeah,
That's why you're in. I can take another 2 hours, but
go ahead.
I was just going to say, toward the end of this, which I think we're getting to, what is a good timeline? I'm kind of asking the board and staff at the same time, but what's a good timeline for another one of these sessions like this? And for me, I'd probably defer maybe after you get going with the strategic plan process, but before it's over with. That is when it would matter. I think that would be a good time to do another one of these. What is that time?
If we need to finalize the strategic plan by the end of December, I would say mid-November, before Thanksgiving would probably be the optimal time.
Mm-hmm. I know that from my time on this board, the period of December 1 through 15 is a very bad time for a lot of big thinking, because a lot of stuff has to get done before the end of the calendar year. And so I think that if we could look at kind of an early November timeline for purposes of setting that, we're more likely to get, a majority, a substantial majority of our commissioners present, and I think this is a good setting, kind of the 9 to 11 a.m. period on Wednesday.
Okay.
Okay, so if you don't have any other business, then we're adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys did a great job.
Thanks so much.